a long presentation. We're happy to take lots of questions. We'll leave the chat open, but try to be able to see.
That's why I got it. I'll look at the chat.
You'll look at the chat. Okay, give us 10 more seconds to set up this technical stuff, and then we are good to go. I see people are still coming in. All right. Welcome, welcome. Okay.
Hi, Lungers. Thanks for turning on your camera.
Boxes here. Okay, thank you for logging on. We are 5 minutes late, as is the Young Israel Minhag. So I think we titled this event what did we title it?
I don't remember.
Okay, we don't remember what we titled it, but Jewish Life on Campus, December 2020. That's what our Google Doc is titled. So hopefully that is vaguely what you came to hear about. And right at the outset, we just wanted to let you know that we're not telling you, we're not here to tell you which schools to go to, which schools are best. We're definitely not here to speak about academics. You have wonderful guidance counselors and advisors and internet sites to tell you all about that. And you probably have wonderful guidance counselors and advisors, hopefully at your school, also to speak to you about Jewish life on campus. But we do feel like we have a little bit of a unique perspective, as we wrote in the little blurb on the flyer, and hopefully for those of us who know us, who I think is mostly people we know. I see some people probably through our partnership with YHS, and we thank Katz Yeshiva High School for partnering with us on this wonderful program. And we did this 2 years ago also for parents, and it was a great turnout and great feedback, so we thought we'd offer it again. So I was in the middle of saying that Sara and I worked at Rutgers University for the Jewish Learning Initiative on Campus program through the OU Jlic. We're not here only to talk about Jlic tonight either, but it did give us living on campus with our family for 3 years and interacting with the students in that capacity, in a professional capacity, gave us the background to really understand what campus life is like. And additionally, I should have mentioned this before, in our own academic journeys, in our own college experience, we both went to YU. I went to YU, Sarah went to Stern. And so that gave us a very positive experience. We had wonderful opportunities there. And so we feel like with that different background, we have a little bit of unique perspective to help bring to the table what we hope will be a little bit helpful to you. I didn't read my notes at all. So let me see did I skip anything? I'm supposed to talk about YU. I did say that. We do not support or condone secular college, but we recognize that if 75% of modern Orthodox students are going to be on secular colleges, which perhaps the number is more, unfortunately, with the challenges of COVID, especially financially, that's why Jlic program is there to help them. And there's other Jewish resources as well. There, I know some of you were at an info session earlier this week about bringing Jlic to Florida. We're not going to focus on that, but we're happy to answer questions about that as well. Right, some campuses obviously have more Yiddishkeit, have more Torah resources, have more rabbinic support, and some have less. And so, excuse me. And so that's just a fact on the ground that's important to know.
Okay, so just in terms of YU, I think it's important to know that just like a secular college, YU has so much to offer, and secular colleges have a lot to offer. They don't have the same things to offer, but they do have some things that overlap. But anywhere you go, you're really going to have to take advantage of it. And that's true at YU as well. And sometimes people, I think, assume that, a vibrant Jewish life at YU is something that's easy and it's just there for you. And in many ways, it really is on the silver platter. On the other hand, you still do need to show up to the programming, make a community for yourself, and really do something with the opportunity in order for the opportunity to sort of really be meaningful for you. And so we think that, my experience at Stern, I actually went to McGill University for a year and then I transferred to Stern. McGill University at the time had like the tiniest Orthodox population. So I really went from being one of very few Shomer Shabbos students to going to Stern the following year and being, in a completely frum environment. But even Stern is not a completely frum environment, but that's where I surrounded myself. And I was that, student who was going to every extra shiur and social program and whatever was going on because I was so excited about being in that social milieu. That may not be what's best for you or your child, but it's important to sort of recognize that even at Stern and YU, you're going to have to take ownership of your experience. And no matter where you go, you really have to think about that. The other thing just to think about is in terms of academically and Jewishly, who you are and whether you want to be, the small fish in the big pond or the big fish in the little fish bowl. So if you go to YU, academically, you have the benefits of a small school. When I was at McGill, I was taking all my first year courses with 700 kids in the big lecture halls, economics 101, psych 101. The professor didn't even I had one psych prof who in first year who tried to learn all our names. It was really impressive. I think it was the biggest lecture hall at McGill. There were over 700 students in the room and he was fantastic. So people actually showed up to class. But aside from him, nobody knew our names. There was no personal relationship with the professors. When I got to Stern, I could literally say hey, can I come for Shabbos and chat with my professors about things. Not all of them were Jewish or Shomer Shabbos, but many of them were. And that was really special and amazing for me and something that I personally really appreciated from an academic perspective. But from a Jewish perspective, I was just one of hundreds of young women who were in college and Shomer Shabbos and looking to learn and looking to grow. Whereas at McGill, I was an integral, important piece of the Jewish community. And when I left, my presence was lacking. Everyone noticed that I was gone. So you have to sort of figure out both Jewishly and academically what you're looking for in that regard. For some students, being in a smaller Jewish community can be very empowering. You can become the Gabbai of your minyan, the president of the Orthodox community, or of the Hillel, or of the Chabad, or whatever it is, and that can be a really empowering experience. These students are going to go on to be the presidents of their local young Israels and things like that. And I think it's important to have those experiences at a young age, and college life really does enable you to grow and develop in your leadership skills. But if you're in a big, huge Jewish community, you're going to feel a little bit more lost and unable to really find yourself in that way than you will if you're in a smaller community. So if you're the kind of person who thinks you're going to thrive more, then I'm not suggesting you go somewhere where you're the only Jewish kid for miles, but you want to maybe consider being in a place where your presence will really feel important and that will be empowering for you Jewishly.
Yeah, I think obviously for guys and for girls, but specifically for guys, Minyan is a great example of that. On one hand, just to show the dichotomy, on one hand, YU has 15 minyanim a day. You can catch mincha at any time, at any hour. So, that's a great resource. On the other hand, I know when my friend was the Rabbi John Hopkins, so they had literally a sticker chart on the wall, in kindergarten, in schools, they all count up to the 100th day of school and it's a big deal. So they made a big deal about getting 100 days of having minyan straight, 100 days of shacharis in a row. And they literally counted on every guy to make the 10, to be the 10th guy. And so for some people, that's incredibly frustrating. I can't sleep in one day, or I don't feel well, or I don't want only one option. And other people I'm not going to minyan unless they need me. So again, there's no right, there's no wrong. It's just different, and it depends on you.
When we were at Rutgers, the guy who was the Gabbai of the minyan for many of the years, most of the years we were there, I think, is the kind of guy who isn't a big learner, but he knew how to lane and he was very involved in minyanim. And I'm not sure he's the kind of kid who still goes to minyan today, daily, but he was there every morning, making sure the Torah was rolled to the right spot. He was making sure the minyan was there. He was really on top of things. And if he would have gone to YU, he would have been, kind of lost. But because he was in a community where he mattered, that really empowered him Jewishly. And I think that was really, significant for him. So
I think it's also true in terms of learning though, right? You can't compare apples to oranges. I had one, this only happened to me once, but I had one parent who called me up and he was basically talking to me and talking to me and talking to me. And after a while, what I figured out, what's the learning like? How's my kid? He was basically asking me if I could set up a way for his son to learn for 3 or 4 hours a day in the morning and then go to classes. Now, again, I don't know if most students are looking for that, but the answer was no, I cannot turn Rutgers into YU for you. If you want to learn 3 or 4 hours a day in the morning, you want to have a serious morning seder and you want to be connected to the Rosh Yeshiva, the greatest rabbis in the country, that's amazing. And there's a school for you and it's not Rutgers. It's YU. So again, and maybe you're not feeling that now, maybe after your year in Israel, that you will be feeling that way. And again, I think one thing to mention, I'll mention it now because I'll forget later, and we can mention it again later, is that going to college is a major life decision, and which college you choose is a major life decision, but it's not a marriage. You should try to find a good match. You should try to make that shidduch. But if it doesn't work out, you don't need to get. You can switch, right? It is a big decision. You should take it seriously. But if you realize you've been in the place for a year, for 2 years, and it's not working out, okay, so you'll go somewhere else for your 3rd and 4th year.
We had students at Rutgers who came. We had students at Rutgers who left. I switched from McGill to Stern, and everyone's okay. It all works out.
So if you try to play, if you think, I thought I was going to go McGill, I ended up going to YU. You might not know, have any idea where you want to go now, and you don't really have to decide now. And again, with COVID, you can't really compare or ask questions of what's going to be, right? Hopefully by the time the students that are interested that are listening tonight and their parents, COVID will be a thing in the rearview mirror. So we'll be back to normal life, hopefully improved life. But it is important, really the takeaway from tonight as we make our way through is to think about what questions to ask. What are the questions that are going to give you the answers, and also how to listen to information that's given to you. Because as hopefully we'll get to, sometimes those same words don't mean the same things to all people.
Okay.
Feel free again to use the chat. We are trying to monitor the chat if you have any questions at any point.
If you're sending a question privately, send it to Sara Frieberg, not to Young Israel of Hollywood, because I can see it better on my screen.
But feel free to post anything you'd like in the chat. Where are we here? Okay, I intuited what I was supposed to say. Again, so tonight we want to help you think about what questions to ask. Just an example, and we're not here again to say anything positive or negative about anyone, but one example is people say, oh, I can go to that school, in Wichita because they have a Chabad. A Chabad is wonderful, and we give full credit to the Chabad Shlichim, the dedicated Rebbitzins and rabbis and their families who move out to the boondocks, to literally the middle of nowhere, to be there for Jewish students. But as an Orthodox student coming from Hollywood or Boca or Florida, where you have hundreds and hundreds of Orthodox families around you, just because there's a Chabad doesn't mean there's a Young Israel of Hollywood. Chabad doesn't mean that everything is fine and dandy, right? They're there if they move to Kansas, Kansas University, they're there for Kiruv. There might be 10 Jews, there might be 1,000 Jews, but Jews don't mean that it's people who care about the things you care about, who have the background you have the same background you or the same interests or needs. And also, Chabad in general is not there to service the Orthodox students. They are there for Jews in general. The same thing is true in Hillel. Having a Hillel is, of course, a wonderful resource. But having a Hillel does not necessarily, it might not mean that they're there to take care of the Orthodox students, right? They may be Orthodox friendly, they may be antagonistic toward the Orthodox students, and who the theirs depends. Again, staff changes, but you need to ask the questions of, you need to figure out what your needs are. Again, like that student who wanted a 4-hour morning Seder, he knew his need and I couldn't provide it for him. But you need to know what your needs are and you need to see, is Hillel going to meet that need?
So just to give a little bit of background about what JLIC is, I just did get a question about JLIC. So JLIC was started by Rabbi Menachem Schrader, who was a rabbi at, I think, Hamiftar at the time. And he was getting a lot of guys who were coming for a semester or for the summer who were in secular college campuses. And when he would talk to them about their experiences there, he just realized that there was no one supporting them. And he became very, very passionate about making sure that all of these modern Orthodox kids on secular campuses were being supported in their modern Orthodox lifestyle. Many of them were at schools where there were amazing, strong Kiruv programs, and those were doing okay for these kids. They weren't really giving them what they needed. And eventually he convinced the OU to sign on. And what they do is they hire a rabbinic couple. In almost every situation, it's a couple that they hire, which is really important for the model because it's important for the female students to have a female role model that they can connect to and that they can have to go to as well. And it's not just a rabbi. And it also, they refer to them as Torah educators. Both of them are giving classes, having chavrusas, hosting Shabbos meals, getting together for coffee dates with students one-on-one, running social programming, and then also doing sort of behind the scenes like Jewish infrastructure support. So making sure there's an Eruv on campus, dealing with the kosher food issues, helping make minyanim happen, all that kind of stuff is all part of JLIC's mandate. It's a program that's a partnership between the OU and the Hillel on the campus, which means that the couple are on the Hillel staff, which depending on the campus can mean different things. I mean, they're always on the Hillel staff, but different Hillels are very different. And just like we said, just because there's a Chabad, you still have to figure out what that means. Just because there's a Hillel, you have to figure out what that means. Some Hillels are like, love their Orthodox students, make them feel 100% welcome, and they're sort of the lifeblood of the Hillel building are the Orthodox students who are there all the time, and other Hillels are less friendly towards Orthodox students. Wherever there's a JLIC couple, obviously there's a bit of a safe haven for the Orthodox students, but it's important to just, sort of figure out those sort of dynamics sometimes and figure out which, where do the Orthodox students hang out and what does that look like and all those kinds of things. But that's sort of what JLIC means. In terms of somebody just asked about creating a JLIC on a campus, so that is a little bit beyond us. It is complicated. The funding generally is a mixture of funding from the OU, from the Hillel, and from fundraising, which needs to be raised from the parent body, from the local community a lot of the time. And that sometimes can be complicated. And depending on the Hillel and the Hillel's financial abilities, it can also look different. So every campus has a little bit of a different sort of agreement between the Hillel and the OU and exactly what that looks like. There isn't really any campus where the OU is willing to 100% support it because they just don't have the funds to do that. But they have, already invested millions of dollars in the support of Orthodox students all over the country. I think right now I don't know exactly how many campuses they're on right now. A couple years ago, it was definitely 22. But in terms of bringing a JLIC to a school, specifically, I think this question is probably talking about starting it in Florida. I think that there really needs to be buy-in from our community here from a financial perspective. And if we can't support it financially, it's not going to last. In terms of it taking off, I think it's a really good question. Let us talk about everything else and maybe come back to that at the end. I think it's really important that you recognize, just like where there's a Hillel and where there's a Chabad doesn't mean there's vibrant Jewish life. Where there's a JLIC, there's a better chance of being supported in your modern Orthodox lifestyle, but it isn't a guarantee either. There are some random schools where you're like, why is there a JLIC there? And there's different reasons historically why they may be there, but just because there's a JLIC doesn't mean they for sure get a daily minyan. And even if you're not a minyan goer as a student, knowing whether they get a daily minyan can give you a bit of a sense of the strength of the Jewish community in and of itself. Even if you aren't necessarily planning on being the person who goes every day, you can have a sense of what kind of students are on the campus based on whether or not they get a minyan. So in terms of JLIC, I think that's pretty good explanation of what it is. And then just in terms of different sort of Jewish infrastructure things to be looking for when you're looking at a campus. So the kosher meal plan. When you call, let's call it the University of Kansas, and say, do you have kosher food? The admissions person might say yes. So you need to make sure you're asking these questions really well. At Rutgers, for example, the kosher meal plan is located in the Chabad house and it is separate from the university. But if you ask an admissions person at Rutgers, they'll tell you that they have kosher food in their cafeterias because they have like those triple wrapped 17-year-old frozen airplane meals that if you ask 3 weeks in advance and you talk to the manager, they'll get it out from the freezer in the back of the storage room and get it heated up for you. So that's true. In a pinch, you can get some kosher food, but it's not actually, you don't want to live like that. So you need to make sure when you say, is there a kosher meal plan, you need to ask a few more questions in terms of what exactly that looks like. And also you want to ask, where is the kosher cafeteria? Am I going to be eating just with other Jewish students in a separate kosher cafeteria? Is the kosher cafeteria part of the main cafeteria where there's just a separate counter for the kosher kids? For some students, that's maybe more appealing. For other students, having like a cafeteria in the Hillel or in the Chabad where they know it's just them and their Jewish friends, well, maybe they can invite some friends to join them, but there's sort of this sense of like, this is my home base, this is where I can go to feel safe and comfortable and just with people who I know are similar to me. Maybe having a kosher cafeteria that's just for the Jews is a better feel for you, but those are different sort of things that happen on different campuses that you have to sort of think about. Also, some campuses have a kosher meal plan, but might only be one meal a day or something like that. So make sure you don't just ask, do you have a kosher meal plan? Right. Get the details.
Yeah, and I think that really goes back to, what I want to talk about is leaving the Orthodox bubble, right? For most of us here, we live in an Orthodox community. Again, everyone has their own journey. For most of our students, especially because we're partnering with Katz Yeshiva High School here, most of our students we're in school with are Orthodox. Obviously, we have some public school kids, some kids at Posnack and other community schools, but most kids in Hollywood I personally interact with are mostly friends with Orthodox students, and that's great. And you might have friends who aren't, and you might have been outside of your bubble in a summer program. Perhaps you have cousins or different avenues where you're outside of your comfort zone. But when you leave your parents' home, when you go out into the big world, you're leaving your comfort zone and you're leaving the Orthodox bubble. And so you need to learn to advocate for yourself, and that's going to be what real life is, I guess, until you get married and move back to Hollywood. And then you can just surround yourself in the Orthodox bubble, I guess, when you're not at work, unless you work at home. Which I guess we all do now. But it's important it's a great learning experience for those who are ready for it. Again, Yeshiva University and Stern obviously provide much more of a bubble for much longer.
But it's not a totally, it's not totally perfect
bubble either.
It's important to realize
but again, I think kosher food is obviously not the only important thing. But being kosher, as any person could tell you, is not so simple, and it's much more complicated when you're not in your own space. So again, Sarah gave a bunch of the examples of what it means to ask for kosher food, but kosher food even gets more complicated, right? When you say, do they have kosher, when you say, oh yeah, Hillel provides a kosher Shabbat dinner. So what does that mean, right? Under whose hashgacha is it? Is it a reliable Orthodox hashgacha you're comfortable with, right? I don't even remember the story, but the university once told some parents.
It was a parent orientation for the honors program, and a mom from like TNET called the university and said, like, I'm going to be coming. I saw you're providing breakfast. Will you have a kosher option? And they said, oh yeah. She's like, oh, where do you get it from? And they gave her the name of some bakery in like southern New Jersey. So she's like, okay. So she called us and she's like, have you ever heard of this bakery? And we're like, no, we'll look into it for you. So Adam calls him up. They pick up the phone and he's like, do you have kosher bagels there? Are you a kosher bakery? He said, oh yeah. Our bagels are kosher. We bake the bagels in the back, but in the front, that's where we take care of like, the pork and the meat and stuff like that. And Adam was like,
okay, like your kosher according. No, like the word kosher doesn't mean anything unless it means something, right? And especially when it comes to Shabbat, which is many times when Hillel's having their biggest program of the week. Like there's two sides to kosher. I think I spoke about this in a program I did a few years ago. Perhaps we should have another one of them. But what is it? Kosher on Shabbat does not only mean that the food was prepared kosher, we also need it to be kosher when it ends up on your plate, which means, was it heated properly on Shabbat? Right? Who's cooking it? Is it a Jew? Is it a non-Jew?
What oven is it in?
What oven is it in? Are the people who are serving it know what they're doing? So there's a lot of questions, and that is where having a JLIC or even a Chabad rabbi on campus is extremely helpful, because you have a resource. You can't expect every kid. Again, it's a way to empower students.
And just to say, like, if a Hillel director who's completely not religious and just not informed about the intricacies of halacha says to you, yes, we get our Shabbat dinner from a kosher caterer, they're totally well-meaning. They're not trying to cause problems. We're not trying to insinuate that they have any malicious intent. But if that is being, dropped off by a kosher caterer on Friday afternoon, and then the Reform rabbi and the Israel fellow and a couple of student board members are sticking it in some random oven and then serving it, you don't know what that looks like. So you want to make sure you're asking those questions. That's an opportunity for students to become empowered. We had students who served as mashgichim at the Hillel Friday night dinner in order so that he could sometimes come home and eat dinner with us. So that's a chance for students to learn about industrial kashrut to some extent, and to be able to feel like they have a leadership role to play in maintaining the kashrut of their community's Friday night dinner, which is amazing. But you need to make sure you're asking those questions. Don't just say, oh, you have kosher Friday dinner? That's so beautiful, and move on. Make sure you ask questions without being rude.
Which is a good transition for us to start moving from kosher to Shabbat. Obviously, discussing Shabbos on campus is a major factor in deciding any campus. So what does Shabbos look like on the campus you're thinking of, right? Whether it's YU, Stern, or whether it's secular campus. Maybe I'll touch on the secular campus. Sarah, you can discuss YU and Stern. But what does Shabbos look like on campus? For example, if you're at a school in the tri-state area, right? Or you're at a school wherever it is, but a lot of the Orthodox students live close to home-ish. So are they staying on campus for Shabbos? Are they going home for Shabbos? Are some staying, are some leaving? Now, maybe they stay for Shabbos, but what about Chagim? What about Yontif? Are they staying for Pesach? Are they staying for Shoshana Yom Kippur? Right, at some schools, again, every school has its own culture. I just remember from when our friends when they were at Penn, at Penn, all the Orthodox students leave for Rosh Hashanah. But on the other hand, all the Orthodox students and hundreds of alumni come back for Yom Kippur. So like every school has its own culture, and maybe you don't care, maybe it's not that important for you, but if you
want to know you have somewhere to
go.
Right,
especially if you're from Florida and you're going to school out of Florida in the Northeast or wherever you're going, and you don't feel like getting on a plane every time it's Yontif rolls around, right? And flying back and forth, especially back and forth with Yontif and classes, and maybe you have class that ends half an hour before Yontif. Excuse me, they have to miss so many more classes, right? Is there home hospitality? Do you have family there? Are there kids who are going to invite you over? Or are you going to be on your own, stuck on campus, or does everyone stay? So there's no right or wrong. These are just some questions to think about.
Yeah, so just to speak a little bit about YU, and I have to give like a bit of a disclaimer here that YU has changed a lot since I was there, I think, just in terms of some of the funding and things like that. But I know that I hear from a lot of kids who are there nowadays that like there just really they don't always feel like there's a sense of community. Nobody stays for Shabbos. If you stay for Shabbos, that means there's something wrong with you. I just want to empower students that if you do choose to go there, it doesn't have to be that way. When I was at Stern, I had a group, I would say of like 20 to 30 friends, not all of us all the time, who saw staying in as an option. And I would say about once a month, most of us would all kind of coordinate to stay in together. And it was the best. Like we had the greatest time, and we made it what it was. And we went to the Stern Shabbos meals, and they were, like fine. Like the food wasn't amazing. It was cafeteria food, but that's true at a lot of campuses. But we stayed in and we just made Shabbos for us. And we didn't really care what else was going on and which Shabbos one was being run by which club. We just did our own thing if it wasn't for us. And we just really, it was an opportunity to not pack up our bags, not go somewhere, and just be in our own rooms and be in our own space, and also be able to really bond with each other. We would sing Zmiros. We would have like an oneg in one of our dorm rooms. We would just find ways to make it really special. On nicer Shabbos, we would go for long walks down to NYU on Shabbos day. You know, we're in Midtown Manhattan. It's not so Shabbos-ic, but in other ways, there are beautiful places to walk. And I think that a lot of the time, people sort of get this message, you're not supposed to stay in, and they never even give it a chance. But if you're a strong enough person that you can gather a couple of friends and say, hey, let's give this a shot, you may find that's not something you necessarily want to do every week. And it's important to have friends and families and friends at other campuses in the New York area that you can go visit. But I think it's really nice as an option and something that is really worthwhile. I know, like he was the opposite extreme. He never, ever, ever.
Right, like
ever
I'll just touch again.
YU.
All our information about YU and Stern is, not that current. We graduated, I guess, a while ago at this point. But I don't think it needs to be different. Like when I don't know, I want to speak about so much about us, more again, what questions to arm you with. But when I was at YU, I loved singing for Shabbos on campus, and I think so many people now.
I said this 2 years ago, but when we got married, he was a senior at YU, and he like begged me to go eat dinner in the calf, and I refused. But he was dying for us to eat in the calf. He loved the calf on Shabbos.
Staying on campus on Shabbos was like being in yeshiva. That's when you actually have a chance. A different Rosh Yeshiva stays in every week. You get a chance to schmooze with them, especially because most kids leave. There's still a few hundred kids who stay. The Zmiros, I think my Dvar Zemer the other day was about a song that we used to Baruch Kaleo, and we used to sing wonderfully at Shabbos lunch in the calf. And a wonderful time staying in at YU, play basketball on Fridays, get essays done in the morning, learn a little. And Shabbos was like amazing conversations with friends, with Rosh Yeshivas, Tishas, Onegs. It was awesome. And so I think that, again, I think a lot of college is what you make of it. Obviously, you want to go to a place that provides the resources, but then you have to take those resources and turn them into something else. We see a bunch of comments in the chat. So far, most of them I think we'll get to at the end. Please keep your questions
another
coming.
thing just to think about, and there's not much to say about this other than just make sure you know ahead of time so you can like prepare yourself. Is there an Eruv on campus or not? And even if there is an Eruv, what is in the Eruv and what is out of the Eruv? And if there isn't one, what are other Shomer Shabbos students doing about that? When I was at McGill, there was no Eruv. As far as I know, there still is not one. But it was something that I sort of had to like get advice about in advance so that I didn't get there. Oftentimes move-in day is like Friday. So you move in and then it's like, oh my God, what do I do with my key? Like, where do I go now? So you want to be prepared for that so you don't feel overwhelmed by that first experience of dealing with halachot that, thank God, most of us live in places where we've never really had to live without an Eruv. So we've never really thought about what it means to not have an Eruv. And so it's just something to make sure you're thinking about. That is something that JLIC does work hard to try to make happen. And if there isn't one, the rabbis are very good about advising the students about how to manage those issues. But those are the kinds of questions you just want to think about and know about before you even get there.
I think we touched on this a little at the beginning, again, but in terms of what questions to ask, I think asking if the campus gets a daily or a weekly minyan is really a fundamental question. Again, even if you're not a minyan goer, first of all, you might become one if they need you. But just because it's just
also, this isn't just about guys. At Rutgers, we had a couple of female students, some who were like not who you would expect, like, you know, girls in their pants and short sleeve t-shirts who were doing what else they were doing on the weekends, who came to minyan every morning because it was important to them to daven every day, and this was a way for them to like make it a sort of like part of their schedule. And they showed up, and it was amazing. And every time I had the opportunity to be there, I was so excited to be at a weekday minyan with other women, because that's something you always experience in regular shuls, but in campus life, that's really something that's really special.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it's a great way for students to start their day off, and there's free breakfast, which is great for students, and just a way to be, if you're going to be out in the big bad world all day, hearing ideas that are foreign to you and you're not used to, and with students from all, races and colors and ethnic backgrounds, sometimes it's nice just to start with it with minyan, with your yeshiva high school friends and people who understand where you're coming from. But again, there's what's on paper and there's what's in reality. It might say on their flyer, we have minyan 3 times a day, but they haven't had a minyan in 6 years. So it's important to ask the real questions of, do you get a minyan every day? Do you struggle to get a minyan? But do you get one? Do you never get one? Do you sometimes get one? What does minyan look like on Shabbat? And so to ask the questions, these sort of questions, that might give you a good sense of what type of community it is.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about dorm life. Most secular campuses do have dorms that oftentimes are not, some are apartment style, which is a nice option for Orthodox students if you can team up with a bunch of other Orthodox students and create a dorm where you all share a kitchen and kosher the kitchen, and then that's a really great option. But that doesn't always work, especially for freshmen. Sometimes that's a great opportunity for upperclassmen, but doesn't work well for freshmen. So if you are going to be in a situation where you need to live in a dorm your first year, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, you need to just think about these issues. So the first is finding out whether or not the bathrooms are co-ed or separate and how you feel about that. I know my friends who went to Barnard, like in their heads, like they were going to an all-girls college. So like, what was the issue? But each floor on the first day had to vote whether they wanted their bathroom to allow guys in or not, because guys were allowed in the dorms to visit their friends and girlfriends, and they had to vote whether they wanted to allow guys into the bathroom with them. So my friend, who was like this, like very sweet, like Tmimistic, sheltered Orthodox girl, was on a floor that didn't have a lot of Orthodox girls on it, and she was outvoted. And like her second day in school, went to the bathroom, and like a guy like came out of the stall wrapped in a towel, and she like nearly fainted. She got used to it, and she learned how to handle it in a way that was comfortable for her. And as soon as she could get out of that dorm, she did, but that wasn't comfortable for her. So that's something you might want to think about and also know about in terms of sometimes some dorm buildings are one way and some dorm buildings are another. So in terms of which one you want to request and that kind of stuff, get that kind of sort of information from the older students ahead of time. The other thing that is becoming more and more of an issue are sort of technology issues. As dorms are being updated and renovated or new ones are being built, you've got automatic lights that can be an issue on Shabbat. And you also have like keys, like a lot of the dorms now have a key fob that you have to sort of scan in order to get into the building. So if you, some of the colleges will have already set up some sort of system where they'll give you a Shabbos key. If you lose it, you have to like pay them back your entire life savings, but that's a way of getting in and out on Shabbos that you have to get special permission in order to get it. Others may not have that opportunity. So it's, having a conversation with the rabbi on campus or with the rabbi here to figure out solutions ahead of time about what you'll do about getting in and out of the building on Shabbat. And with the automatic lights, sometimes there is room to make it work, but you need to make sure you find out ahead of time so that, again, your first day on campus is going to turn out to be Shabbat and you're not going to know what to do. You're going to go to the bathroom. All the lights are going to turn on. Oh my gosh, what do I do now? This was an issue that came up for us at Rutgers. They were building a brand new, beautiful, state-of-the-art honors college dorm that in order to be part of the honors college program, you had to live in that dorm as a freshman. And so thankfully, because we were there and they were still building it and everything, my husband was able to go in with the building manager and check out what type of light bulbs they're using, right? Depending on what kind of light bulb they're using, it can be more lenient. And so we were able to figure out exactly what the best solution was for our students ahead of time before they moved in. So those are the kinds of questions that you want to ask, and hopefully whatever rabbinic presence is on campus is supportive of that. Also at some campuses, there are Jewish dorms. Like at Rutgers, there's a big kosher dorm in the Chabad house, which a lot of the Orthodox students choose to live in. Many choose not to, but that's an option as well. So it's something to sort of think about what is going to be most comfortable and best for you and what you feel you can handle and want to handle, and make sure you're thinking about that when you're looking at different campuses.
Right, that also has to do with roommates. It's different colleges, different rooms. Sometimes you can do whatever you want. You can live at home, you can live on campus, you can live off campus. Some colleges, first year, you have to live on campus, you have to get a random roommate. You don't have a choice, and your roommate could be the nicest person in the world, or they could be someone who's not going to be understanding of your Shabbos needs. And how are you going to deal with living with a non-Jew? How are you going to deal with living with a Jew who's not from? And so these are all things you should go in with your eyes open and know what their rules are, what accommodations they have. And do you have to be a trailblazer and figure this all out for yourself? Or is there a rabbinic couple or presence on campus? Or are there other Orthodox students who have dealt with these issues? All right, many are familiar with that lawsuit from Yale way back when at this point, where they sued they sued the university over some sort of dorm issue. So these are issues that have been around for a while. I think they lost. Someone asked about the orientation of professors and the atmosphere on campus in terms of Israel issues, right? About Israel, about campuses being anti-Israel and anti-Semitic nature of campuses. The real answer is it varies campus to campus. It varies professor to professor.
It also varies year to year. Sometimes like a new campus becomes a little bit of like the hotbed because something drastic happens, or their new SJP president is like really charismatic, and so they make a big splash. So there's no guarantee, no matter where you go, that something may not come up.
Right, and I think the yeshivas, both high schools and seminaries and yeshivas in Israel, doing a better job of Israel advocacy and preparing for students on campus. I'll tell you, it's not like the movies, right? You see these trailer films for students fighting and tear gas flying all over the place and protests. And like at some campuses, maybe that happens a few times a year, right? During Israel Apartheid Week or whatever other shenanigans that happen. But the real answer most of the time is that if you're interested in this, you can find the dialogue. If you're interested in this, you can make it a fight. And if you're not interested in it, you can completely ignore it. Now, will someone of the 5,000 or 50,000 people on campus make some anti-Semitic comment if you're walking under the kippah? Maybe, but that might happen in the real world also. Now, will some professor be more or less accommodating about Shmini Atzeres, which is not a real holiday according to them? Maybe.
Oftentimes, those are the non-religious Jewish professors who have the hardest time with Yontif, because it's like, well, I didn't come on Rosh Hashanah, so I get that, but I'm going to be here on this Sukkot holiday you're making up, so why can't you?
Right.
That comes up for some students.
Right.
Everywhere.
So again, if there's a place, if there's a place that they have another 50 Orthodox students and they get the same letter from the rabbi every year and they know the drill, so it's easier. And if you have to blaze your own trail, you have to blaze it. Listen, the freedom of religion amendment rights that exist in this country exist on campus also, but it is frustrating sometimes, or you have to deal with it. And listen, sometimes professors have leeway. They can say, sure, you're missing a test. Okay, well, I'm allowed to not let you make it up and just make your next test count for twice as much. Again, you can't always beat the system, and sometimes it doesn't work out that conveniently. And for sure, listen, there are major distinctions between secular universities and Jewish universities. Someone asked here about, are there any other Jewish universities besides YU and Stern versus secular campus? Yes, for sure, there's Landers and Touro. Personally, we're just really unfamiliar with Landers and Touro. I'm sure it's a great institution. I really know very little about it. I'm sure they let you off for Yontif. I know obviously Landers has a yeshiva program in the morning. I'm not sure what Touro for Women has in terms of Torah learning. We're not the right people to answer questions about that, but obviously that is a Jewish option. But in terms of how it is for students walking into a secular campus, right? If it's a year where Yontif all falls on the weekends, so it's not so bad. But if it's a year where Yontif is every Tuesday, Wednesday, and therefore you're missing Tuesday, Wednesday, Yom Kippur's on Shabbos, and then Tuesday, Wednesday again. You missed 3 Tuesday, Wednesdays in the first month of class, and obviously it's 2 weeks after the classes were just orientations about nothing. So really, right when they get into the crux of all the material, it is overwhelming. I'm not going to lie, it's not. Again,
It's the hardest on freshmen, and also it always depends on the year. If Yontif is like the day after Labor Day, then in some ways that's an advantage, because it means by the time midterms roll around, you've already passed Yontif. But it also means like during the ad drop period, which is like usually the first 2 weeks of the semester, where you can try to sort of try courses out and then decide if you want to drop them or switch them or whatever, you didn't get a chance to check out the classes because it was Yontif. And other times Yontif falls right when midterms fall, and that is incredibly stressful for students. So these are real issues that we're not going to pretend don't exist. Many Orthodox students have made it through and survived to tell the tale, but it doesn't mean it's not stressful. If you are a particularly anxious student, this is something to bear in mind when you are choosing campuses. Some do at least give off for Rosh Hashanah, so those are questions to ask if that's really important to you. I'm not sure I would say choose your college over just those 2 days of the whole school year, but if you know that you're a very anxious student, this is something that I really would think about very seriously.
Again, just another point, whether it's minor or major, depends on you, is to know what kind of, does your campus give any credit, academic credit, for your year spent in Israel, right? Again, things change so quickly. Rely on your college guidance counselors much more strongly for accurate information than from us. But I know in the past, Queen's University and Binghamton University used to give at least some sort of college credit for your courses in Israel. So for some people, that's a huge deal. It means you could save a semester or a year. On the other hand, if you want to be pre-med, those credits might not mean anything to you. So it really depends on that's really an anomaly. Obviously, YU Stern give a year of credit, again, depending on what you major in, it may or may not be helpful to you. I'm sure Touro does as well, but that is a question to ask.
Okay, in terms of thinking about checking out campuses, this is a hard thing to talk about right now because travel is obviously not something that we're all rushing to do. But as things hopefully do become safer and open up more and it becomes more of an opportunity, we really do suggest planning in advance. I can't tell you how many times we had families who would call us on like a Tuesday night, be like, hey, I just got your number from so-and-so. I heard you're the Rebbitzin at Rutgers. We just got here from LA. We flew in this morning and we're only going to be in New Jersey for 4 hours. And we just found out that Rutgers doesn't offer campus tours on Tuesday. Can you drive us around campus tomorrow and show us everything? And like, well, I would love to, but I have, a meeting and a chavrusa with a student and whatever else. And also I'm not a Rutgers tour guide. I can't show you everything. I can show you the Hillel house. So really plan in advance. make sure you check when tours are offered, which tours are offered. Sometimes colleges have like different types of tours. If you know you want to be in engineering school, you want to make sure you do the engineering tour, not just the general tour. Those kinds of questions are things you really need to think about in advance. And also, we really, really encourage you, once you have sort of narrowed it down to sort of your top 2 or 3 schools you're interested in. Again, this is not really relevant at this current moment in history, but hopefully very soon. Really make an effort, as hard as it is, especially if you're talking about schools, you know, in the Midwest or the Northeast that maybe aren't as accessible from Florida, but really consider spending a Shabbos on campus that is not a planned, organized, like prospective Jewish student Shabbaton with Hillel or prospective Jewish student Shabbaton with Chabad. As much as those institutions are so nice that they organize these things and they make the parents feel really good because they think everything's going to be really safe, you can't get a sense of the campus Jewish community when you go on one of those Shabbatons. If the Hillel or Chabad is smart, they literally lock the high school students like in the dorm the whole Shabbos because they don't want anything bad happening to any of the students on their watch. But that means you can't get a sense of the campus. If you can find, you know, a cousin or a friend or another community member, or you can call the JLIC couple or the Hillel and see if they can hook you up with someone. We used to do that for kids all the time, and stay with a student for Shabbos and have them sort of take you around and show you what the life is like. That is the best way to get a sense of what the campus life feels like. We had a student at Rutgers who we're still close with, who her whole high school career was going to Brandeis, going to Brandeis, going to Brandeis, going to Brandeis. When she was in the beginning of 12th grade, she went to Brandeis for Shabbos, and she came home and she's like, there's no way I'm going to Brandeis. She just sort of had this realization that what she thought it was going to be wasn't what it felt like to her. Now, to be fair, maybe she misjudged it over just a 2-day visit, but you can't know what a campus feels like and what the community feels like and what the vibe is until you're there. So we really do encourage you to try to do that as much as is possible. And even more so doing it on a Shabbos than going on a random Tuesday. Obviously, you can get some sense of the community if you happen to go to a social program or, you know, go to the caf during dinner and like meet people then. It's definitely better than not going at all, but a Shabbos visit is definitely your best way to really get a sense of what the community feels like.
Yeah, I think someone asked a rather complicated question. I think if I understand it, they're asking about undergrad versus grad school. And if really undergrad is just a way to get to grad school, then a grad school is really what's going to get you a job. What's important nowadays, you know, undergrad is the new high school degree. Doesn't mean a lot in the world. What do we think about online college? I think that's the question, if I'm misunderstanding. I honestly, like, I don't really have any thoughts about that. You know, we're here to help people choose the best college for them and to understand what question to ask in terms of Jewish life on campus. So if you're thinking about online college, again, that was never really in my mind as an option, but obviously now that everyone's basically online, obviously online college is definitely an option in terms of Jewishly. So then it'll be wherever you are. You know, if you want to go learn in the mirror and go to online college, I guess you'll be in the mirror. And if you want to sit at home in Hollywood, then you'll be here and you know what your Jewish life looks like here and you have the resources and your kosher food. And you know, the shul's programming. But you know, I guess now now that we're so much more of a digital society, right? Maybe you can have a 3-hour day chavrusa with a friend who's in YU. I guess you could have done it before also, just no one really thought about it that way. But I mean, I guess we're really trying to focus here. People are students who are going to go live on campus for a year or 4 to understand what kind of venue they're getting into.
I do think though, for the online option, I think that for some students who maybe are not like, you know, the kind of kid who really feels they want to go and explore themselves and find themselves and, you know, have that college experience, then I think it could be a great option in terms of financial, you know, the financial considerations and what their ultimate goals are. It definitely could be an option, but you have to make sure you're really thinking about what it is you're looking for and what it is you want to do, and how you sort of envision college. This is something that we didn't necessarily relate to so much. Having grown up in Canada, where college is not really like as defining as it is for Americans, right? Like here, when you meet someone, one of the first things you ask them is like, where'd you go to school? Growing up in like the non-religious Toronto Jewish community, it's where'd you go to summer camp? Like nobody cares where you went to university. And we didn't prep for university for our entire high school careers. We didn't have SATs. It was a very different experience for us. And when we came here and we really saw like people really put a lot of sort of emphasis on what their college experience did for them and who they are and how it shaped them as a person and the friends they make. And those experiences really are valuable. But sometimes as a high school student, it may seem even more of a big deal than it necessarily is once you're there. At the end of the day, wherever you go, I think if you put the effort in to make the best of it and you really try to get the most out of it from an academic perspective, from a social perspective, from a religious Jewish perspective, you really can have an amazing experience, even if it doesn't turn out to be the most perfect fit for you. It's like, just like most other things in life, you're never going to find the campus that ticks every single box you're looking for. And the most important thing is just making sure you know what you're looking for. And it's hard to know that until you're there. But definitely sort of figuring out what kind of a kid you are. Are you going to thrive more in a smaller community? Are you going to thrive more in a bigger community? Are you more comfortable having everything sort of taken care of for you and you just get to show up to the awesome programs? Or do you want to like make those programs happen? So that's sort of, you know, something that you have to figure out who you are and where you're at in terms of figuring that out for yourself.
Just two more things we want to touch on, and then we're happy to take questions. First of all, just
JLIC question again.
one piece of practical advice. I see that Dr. Steers on here, and as a university professor with an insider scoop, he just points out that, again, in terms of planning for Yontif, that the earlier you can go, the more proactive as a student you can be to go to your professor. They appreciate that, and that helps get them on your side if they're open to being on your side. He also points out that public universities are sometimes more willing to be more accommodating than private institutions. Again, I don't really have any comments on that. I was only worked at a public university.
It also does depend like on what you choose to major in turn. Like we had one student at Rutgers who was majoring in Middle East studies, which might sound like, oh, that's so nice, Israel. No, it's like basically all Palestinian professors, and her Yontif experiences were less than pleasant. So, you know, you got it, but she chose to major in it, and she knew she was like the first Orthodox student to do that. And so she put herself in a situation where she was willing to take that risk. She had one professor who made her have her final count for like 100% of her grade because she missed the midterm on Sukkot, and like they weren't willing to have a conversation about it. And then she tried going to the dean, but according to the policy, it was up to the professor to decide how to distribute the grades if you had to miss the midterm. So they were within the policies of the university, and there was nothing she could do. So if she would have chose to major in Jewish history, I'm not really sure she would have had such a negative experience. So it's just something to consider as you're choosing a major. If that's something you're really passionate about, like all the power to you, but just think about that. Yeah. Okay, in terms of the Florida schools, I know some people have questions about that. We are really not the right people to ask. We don't know a ton about the Florida schools. I think it's also important to know that things do change, and you know there are always sort of new developments, but make sure you're asking questions about what the kosher meal plan looks like. If there are Orthodox students on campus, where are they hanging out? What do they tend to do? You may speak to a Hillel director who tells you, oh yeah, we have Orthodox students here all the time. And then you might speak to a Orthodox student who tells you like, no, none of us hang out at the Hillel. So you really want to get a sense of what that looks like. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that. If they all hang out at the Chabad and it's a good fit for them, then that's wonderful. But if you're the kind of student who knows that you're really going to want to have like at least once a week, some shiur you go to that like resonates with you and you really connect with, then it could be that, you know, the Chabad may not be providing the Torah you're looking for. They might be. It might be wonderful and amazing and inspiring. And if that is, then that's wonderful. But you want to just make sure you're sort of really thinking about what it is you're looking for and asking whether or not that exists on the campus you're looking at. And also to just think about, you know, what does the kosher meal plan look like? Where do students tend to live? Do they live in apartments? Do they live in the dorms? Is the Hillel and Chabad local to campus? Is it a very long walk? Is it hard to get there? When the Hillel says that they provide kosher Shabbat dinner, who's making sure the food is kosher? Those kinds of questions in order to figure that out. Somebody did ask, like, how long would it take for a JLIC to sort of get off the ground? So I don't know exactly what it involves in terms of like, as far as I know, like if somebody showed up to the OU in like the end of August and said, here's $1 million, please open a JLIC in Miami, like I honestly think the OU would do it if they didn't have to put any money in. They want to support Jewish students wherever they can. But obviously, it's not going to happen that way. So in order to get the funding together, that's one piece. But even once it happens, again, just because there's a JLIC on a campus doesn't necessarily mean there's a vibrant Orthodox community on that campus. So when a JLIC first gets to a campus, it's going to take them a couple of years to sort of build up the kind of community that we hope it will grow into. So that takes some trailblazing families who are willing to decide if that's the right fit for their child. And I'm not really suggesting that you kind of put your kid on the Akeda if you don't think it's right for your kid, to send them to a campus where there's only 3 other Shomer Shabbos kids, in order that 10 years from now, there will be 100 Shomer Shabbos kids. That would be wonderful and amazing. But if you're not the kid who wants to be one of 3 Shomer Shabbos kids, don't be that kid. Don't do it to yourself. As much as I want JLIC to succeed and to be a great resource for students in Florida, I think it's really important to make sure that you recognize that the minute a JLIC gets somewhere, it's not going to completely transform the student's experience, and it's going to take time for the community to grow and build itself.
Right.
No.
Yeah, I mean, but you never know, right? Like maybe there's 50 families waiting in the wings, and they're just waiting for everyone to come.
Someone's telling me there's currently 20 Shomer Shabbos kids at UF. I did speak with somebody today who's at UF. She told me the same number, 20. There are a bunch of different schools in Florida, so I didn't want to like specify a school and say numbers without, you know, knowing any of the other numbers at other places. The other thing she mentioned to me is that at UCF, there's a lot of Shomer Shabbos kids, but they're almost all male. So if you're female, that's a question you want to ask. If you're male and you're looking at another campus, you might want to say, you know, how many guys, how many girls? Maybe you don't care, maybe you do care, but if you want to make sure you have same gendered friends who are also Shomer Shabbos, you want to ask those questions, because who are your roommates going to be in your second year of school when you do get an apartment? So you want to think about those things too.
Right. Okay, I think we'll stop talking now. We're a small group, so if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask any questions, feel free. I think you have the ability to unmute yourself.
If not, chat me.
If not, you can chat us. Otherwise, you know where to find us. Right? You can find, if you don't have our email, you can find it on the website. Our phone numbers are there. You can call the shul office. You can call us personally, text, however we can be helpful. We are 4 years removed from campus, so we don't know as many of the educators personally anymore, at least in the JLIC world. But
we can still help you make connections.
We can still help you make connections. I would definitely check out their website. The JLIC website shows all the campuses that they have. Obviously, we can speak from Stern NYU from personal experience. I'm sure Stern NYU employs wonderful people who can tell you more practical experience, and I'm sure many of you know students who are currently there. If not, I'm happy to connect you as well. Again, I'm sure I can connect you with Turo and Lander students as well, but I offhand know fewer of those.
Just one thing to add that somebody asked before in one of the private messages, are there any other options aside from Stern NYU or secular campus? I guess one other option is that some American students do go to college in Israel, even if they're not making Aliyah. There are currently 2 JLIC type programs in Israel, one at Bar Ilan and one at, what's it called? IDC. And IDC program I know more about. It's just because they are super active on social media and they seem to be doing amazing work. But it's definitely an option that is great for some kids. And I'm sure there are some parents who are going, why is she saying that? Why is she saying that? Don't tell my kid. But it definitely is a good option for some people and something to think about, especially in terms of the difference in tuition dollars and things like that that may be involved. So if you're just trying to think outside of the box and look at what all your options are, that is something to consider. Any other questions?